New Orleans Saints upgraded their offensive line in a major way this Thursday night in the 2024 NFL Draft, selecting Oregon State offensive tackle Taliese Fuaga. I love the pick. I think this is exactly what the Saints need, and I'll tell you more about it right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosevoglu, and as always, we're brought to you by Scott McNair, Injury Lawyers, and by Crystal Hot Sauce. So, guys, this was the moment for the Saints. We all knew they needed an offensive lineman. I know some of us, including myself, would have liked a little bit of a flashier pick, whether it was Brock Bowers, who went one pick before Fuaga. Maybe you go even flashier than that and think about a wide receiver, Rome Odunze going number 9 to the Bears. But the Saints get a position of need. They get a great prospect, and they also, most importantly, didn't do what some of us were worried they were going to do, and that was trade some assets to go ahead and get Fuaga. There was rumors about the Saints moving up, maybe to 10 where the Jets were. They didn't do that, which is good news, because I think when you're going to get a prospect and go for offensive line, the most important thing is that you don't get rid of the farm, and that's something that I think Mickey Loomis has done far too many times, but he hasn't this time. Thank God. So let's talk about the pick. Exclusively talk about Taliese Fuaga. And let's get into it. And if you guys are in the chat right now, make sure to like and subscribe. We really would appreciate it. So let's start off with the basics here with Fuaga. When you talk about the tape, I see an absolute mauler, a guy who is so polished in the run game that the minute we get to week 1, assuming he's healthy, obviously health's a big thing when it comes to Saints rookies, I think Fuaga is going to be excellent, especially in a Clint Kubiak offense, going from the Kubiak and Shanahan family lineage where they want to run the football. I think that is the strength to him. In that kind of wide zone scheme, I think he's going to excel. You already talked about that just a couple of minutes ago. I love this fit. I really, really think that Fuaga is the type of run blocker that the Saints have been looking for. And I also love the versatility. Now, I would like to see him play offensive tackle. I think you draft him to be an offensive tackle. But if that doesn't work, there is that added versatility of moving him to guard. So I think that is just an added bonus for him. But how about the pass blocking? What I find interesting about Fuaga is if you're going to look at the negatives, the negative is that he needs to get more polished as a pass blocker. And I'm not going to deny that. I think that you see it at times, his hands and his arms just need to be a little bit better. That said, when you just look at the numbers, specifically last year, he had 330 plus pass blocking snaps. In those 330 plus pass blocking snaps, he had 12 QB pressures allowed. How many sacks in those 12 QB pressures? 0. So that's a big thing for the Saints. Because remember, early in the year, Derek Carr was getting absolutely demolished. And a lot of it was coming from Trevor Penning struggling on the left side. Now, I expect Fuaga to be on the right side because I also don't expect Ryan Ramczyk to play another game for the Saints ever again, which absolutely stinks. But this is a guy who, again, elite run blocker, can give you flexibility on the O-line, didn't give up a sack. And you know what? He also checks off another box for the Saints. And you guys might not want to hear this. He is a Senior Bowl guy. He was named the top guy on the national team, voted by the opposing D lineman that he went to. So that's an impressive, award. And for me, I always want to see, how do you play against a good competition? Now, there is some concern about his tape against, I believe it was Ohio State. But when you look at the in-conference competition, UCLA, Utah, which, by the way, had good players in this draft. Think about Caden Ellis' younger brother. He plays for Utah. He's a really good pass rusher. You think about Latu, who went the pick right after Fuaga, good pass rusher. Those are some of his best games on tape. So I think this is a really, really intriguing pick for the Saints. It is a position of need. It is a really good prospect. There's versatility involved, and you didn't give up assets. So I love all that about it. I think this is great for New Orleans. And if it doesn't work, and I don't even want to think that far, but if it doesn't work, we can talk about how the Saints probably should be banned from drafting offensive linemen. But I think this is going to work. And the thing that I like about Fuaga relative to other offensive linemen in this class and relative to Trevor Penning, because I know a lot of you guys got some PTSD right now, and there's a lot of people who didn't want the Saints to draft an offensive lineman because of Trevor Penning. And I don't blame you, by the way. I don't blame you at all. I kind of felt that way a little bit. But the floor for him is higher than everyone else. I can't sit here today and tell you guys that Fuaga has a higher ceiling than maybe someone like Olu from Penn State. I can't say that because I don't believe that. But the floor, significantly higher. So maybe he doesn't become the best offensive tackle of this class. Maybe not. Maybe he's the most consistent, though. And at the very least, I think he has something that we know Trevor Penning lacks at the moment. And this isn't me trying to diss Trevor Penning, but Trevor Penning so far looks to be a bust. Fuaga, in my opinion, seems to be bust-proof in the sense that I think at the very least, he's going to be a very, very respectable football player for the New Orleans Saints. So that really definitely intrigued me. So I'm going to get to some comments you guys put in the chat. And by the way, if you guys are listening, make sure to smash that like button. It definitely helps out the channel. And also subscribe to Buku Media if you're not already subscribed, because we got 2 more days of this draft, which means you got more days of seeing my stupid face everywhere, because the Saints still have more picks to go. They got 45 in round 2. Then that's it for the day 2. I think that the Saints are going to make a trade, though. So if you want to quote me, you can. I feel like they're going to make a trade at some point tomorrow. And when it comes to day 3, they got about a gazillion 5th-round picks, 2 6th-round picks, and a 7th. So they'll be active on day 3 for sure. That is if they don't completely, obliterate those assets to move up. So let's get into it. Let's go to some comments you guys have. We're going to start with Hayden here saying, would have loved Dallas Turner, but they needed a tackle badly, and we got an absolute mauler. I agree with you, and that's what excites me about this pick. By the way, for the record, if they drafted Dallas Turner, I wouldn't have been mad about that. I thought Dallas Turner was going to go 8 to Atlanta. Atlanta had other ideas, which was kind of wild to see them go out there and get a QB in Michael Penix Jr. I'm sure one of you guys mentioned it at some point, but we'll get to that if you mention it. But I do agree. Like, Dallas Turner would have been a fun pick. Would have been a good pick, too, especially BPA-wise and overall value. And I think pass rusher is still a position you need for the New Orleans Saints. But I think that you go out there and you get yourself an offensive tackle who's going to be potentially great for years to come. We shall see. Jack says, people complaining we didn't take a QB. LMAO, we need an offensive tackle more than California needs rain, and not giving up future picks for this pick makes it easily better than Trevor Penning. Yeah, regarding the quarterback comment, Jack, I mean, who are they going to take? I would love to see the Saints get a young quarterback, right? I've been vouching for that. And I'm one of those people who believes you should take quarterback every year, because if you don't have your guy, if you don't have Mahomes, if you don't got Josh Allen, you don't got Joe Burrow, take one until you get that next guy. But I think for the Saints, in this position you're at right now, having a good quarterback, having fancy, flashy offensive weapons means absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing if you can't protect, if you can't run the football because your O-line. So that's what I love about Fuaga, right? Because we're all going to sit here today and say, oh, man, they could have got Brock Bowers. And I would have loved to see Brock Bowers in New Orleans. Oh, they could have got, an exciting receiver. Maybe some of you mentioned Brian Thomas. But none of that matters if Derek Carr is running for his life because he's got no protection. And I'm going to be honest, Derek Carr also has issues when it comes to reading defenses. So you got to protect him as much as possible right now, at least for this season. And it's not even just about Derek Carr. Fuaga hopefully is the offensive tackle that protects the quarterback of the future for the Saints, whoever that may be. So it's not just about this year. But, I just didn't see, them going for a quarterback in this draft. It just never made any sense. Jerry G says, I love it. I love the confidence and optimism, Jerry, and I'm with you. I'm excited about this pick. I know that offensive lineman pick can get really boring, but when they hit, there's nothing better than when you're watching an NFL game and it's a just dominant performance in the trenches. I think back to, and I'm sure a lot of you guys remember this, in, I believe it was 2017, the Saints played the Bills, and I think they ran the ball. I forgot how many times in a row, but the Bills could not stop them. And the Saints had that dominant type of O-line that just moved the D-line back completely. And I loved seeing that. So I think that's what you want to get back to. And this is a start. Jason says it was a great pick. We stayed put and got our guy. I agree. And I love that. And I'm sure the Saints worked the phones. I'm sure the Saints wanted to go out there and get another guy and move up. But you get Fuaga. You don't have to give up assets. That's huge. Because I think the worst scenario for the Saints would have been to trade up and you get rid of pick 45. Because pick 45, with the way this board is shaping out, you can get a very good player. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. We'll talk about day 2 needs. We'll talk about, what the Saints need to address in just a moment. I want to get through a couple more comments from you guys, and then I'll get back to the day 2 needs. But again, when you get Fuaga and you don't have to give up those extra assets, it definitely lets you be a little bit more flexible on day 2, which the Saints need. They need that flexibility because they don't have a ton of day 2 picks at the moment. I'm going to go to John saying, I'm excited about Fuaga. I'm way more excited about the Falcons pick. That Falcons pick was interesting. And, I'll talk about it briefly because it is important. It pertains to the NFC South. The Saints are going to face the Falcons twice. I have no problem with Michael Penix Jr. I think Michael Penix Jr. is a very intriguing talent. And former Saints quarterback Chase Daniels said Michael Penix Jr. is his best fit is New Orleans. So I'm not going to crap on Michael Penix Jr., the player. or the prospect. I think he's a pretty good prospect. How, though, as an organization, can you sell giving Kirk Cousins racks on top of racks, and then all of a sudden you draft a quarterback at number 8 who is coming off, yes, a great year, but he's one of those older prospects with 2 ACL surgeries. So he's not going to start this year, in my opinion, and he's already going to be 24. He's probably not starting the next year. So you're going to sell the fan base on we drafted a quarterback who's had 2 ACL surgeries, who's not going to start until he's 26. And that's if Kirk Cousins isn't good enough by the 3rd year. And the one thing we know about Kirk Cousins is he might not be good enough to win a Super Bowl. He's good enough to keep his job for a long time. So that's a fascinating pick. It's not a knock on Penix. I think Penix is a solid quarterback. But, the Falcons could have gone out there and got Rome Odunze. They could have got out there and got Dallas Turner. They could have got an offensive lineman. They could have done a lot of things. And to get a quarterback, when you already just signed one for $180 million, that's interesting. Now, the flip side of that, I commend them. They stuck to their guns. They wanted a guy, and they didn't let the fact that they signed Kirk Cousins to a deal deter them from that. But I don't know. It's a pick that it leaves you wondering. At the minimum, leaves you wondering. So let me get into needs for the Saints as we get closer to day 2. We're still only on pick number 21 or 22 in this draft, so still a lot more to go. But the Saints obviously have more needs. This is not a team that is one pick away. And as much as I like Fuaga, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And obviously for New Orleans, there's still needs on the offensive side of the football. So let's talk about it. With those needs being said, I think the first one that you're looking at is a pass catcher. I don't care if it's wide receiver. I don't care if it's tight end. A pass catcher, period. And with the way this draft is shaking up, and I'll talk about best players available in just a little bit, the Saints could get a decent one. And the one that I would say keep an eye on, and that's assuming he doesn't get drafted by the end of tonight. I don't think he will, but who knows? I've been known to jinx some things, so I hope I don't. I'd look at Keon Coleman from Florida State. He is a 6'3" physical type of receiver that will be that Michael Thomas replacement. Not Michael Thomas. Obviously, you can't replace a talent like that when he's healthy. But Keon Coleman would give you that physical element. And I think that's something the Saints are missing from their receiving core is you got the technician in Olave. You got the speed threat in Shaheed. You got A.T. Perry, who's a bigger receiver and a guy who came on strong at the end of last year, but we don't know that he's going to replicate that. We hope he replicates it, but we don't know. I think Keon Coleman would be a tremendous addition. So day 2 needs, we're going to start with the first one. That's pass catcher, preferably wide receiver, but I don't love this tight end room. I don't, and I think for New Orleans right now, we'll see what happens. Sanders from Texas is an interesting one. Obviously, Ben from Kansas State's a guy that I really, really like. I think he's a player that if you can get him on day 2, that'd be an intriguing fit. And we'll see. I know people like Theo Johnson from Penn State. I think he's going to need some work. I think that's a guy that's not that polished. So we'll see what happens. But that's a position of need. Obviously, pass catcher in general. We'll broaden it to that instead of just saying wide receiver, although the Saints need one. Now, you guys might not want to hear it. Another need. Still in the top 3. I would say it's still arguably the biggest need outside of pass catcher. It's still offensive line. I know they just drafted Fuaga, but the Saints, I'll say it again. Assuming you think Fuaga is going to be a good starter as a rookie, they have 3 offensive linemen you can trust. Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz, and then obviously we're hoping Fuaga is a 3rd. But Ramczyk may never play another game. James Hurst just retired. Trevor Penning, we have no idea what he's going to be. So there's question marks. You don't have Pete right now. Maybe you bring him back. And I want to put this out there. Pay attention to Sunday. The Saints are a team that historically is known the last couple of years, waiting until the comp pick formula has been factored in and getting some vets. So maybe they go out there and get Pete back. Maybe they get Becton. Although as a guy who's from New York, I'm telling you, Becton is not it. I mean, I know the name is there. I know he is just, a mountain of a man in terms of just physical stature, but I don't know if that's the guy you go get. But offensive line is going to be a need for the Saints. And I think that when you look out there and look at the draft board, if it shapes up where they can go get another offensive lineman, I would not be surprised if they go do it. Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma is still hanging around. I'm not saying you double dip on offensive tackles, but they may want to consider it. So I would look into that, and I would look into the interior of this offensive line, whether it's Christian Haynes from UConn. I know that they met with the kid from Boston College, so maybe that's someone you flag later on in the draft. But offensive line would be a secondary need for this team for sure. 3rd need, I think you got to look at defensive tackle. I think defensive tackle is a bigger need than we'd like to say. And that doesn't mean Brian Brzee isn't good. I think Brian Brzee was a hell of a pick last year. But Colin Saunders did not play well enough. Nathan Shepard did not play well enough. Those are two signings that the Saints brought in to kind of revamp the defensive tackle group. And I don't know. I didn't love either one. I don't think either one did a great job, particularly well for New Orleans. So I would look at those positions for sure. They'll be the top three for me: pass catcher, offensive line, and defensive tackle. But it doesn't just stop there. If the Saints are thinking about life after Marshawn Lattimore, cornerback is one that you look at. And the crazy thing about cornerback is right now, and I don't expect this to hold, but at this moment, you got Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo still around. You got Terrion Arnold still around. You got Cooper DeJean still around. You got Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama still around. These are guys that are expected to go first round as cornerbacks that are still hanging around. So if they're there at 45, that's probably a guy who gets picked for the Saints. So, I mentioned pass catcher, O-line, defensive tackle. If these great cornerbacks drop to 45, I know the Saints have a good cornerback room. Don't be surprised if they take one of them for two reasons. Either Lattimore or Paulson Adebo will not be on the Saints after 2024. Adebo's a free agent that year. Lattimore, they're already making it pretty clear they wouldn't mind moving on from him. So cornerback is the sneaky need for them. And then some extras. Safety, you need help there. This one, you guys might laugh at me. The Saints need a punter. You address that late day 3, but they need a punter. And then quarterback, you could just throw it in there because you can never have enough quarterbacks, especially if you're not sure if your guy's going to be the quarterback of the future. So there's a plethora of needs, and there they are there. So before I get into best available, I'm going to switch over to more comments from you guys, see what you guys put in the chat. Let's see what they have. Jason says, move Penning to guard. I don't know if that is feasible. They have not talked about it yet. Every time the Saints get asked about that possibility, they kind of turn it down. It almost seems like they don't want to put him at guard. Best case scenario for the Saints. Best case scenario. Fuaga ends up being a hit, and the new offensive line and new offensive coaching staff find a way to get something out of Penning. Sounds like a pipe dream, but to me, that would be the best case scenario for the Saints because you got the two potential offensive tackles of the future, although I'm not putting stock in that happening for Penning. And then you got Ruiz and McCoy inside, and then left guard you can figure out. That could be patchwork. That could be Saldiveri. That could be re-signing Pete. That could be getting a guy, in day 2 or day 3. So moving Penning to guard, it sounds nice in theory, but the Saints have been pretty adamant that they're not going to do it. But again, we'll see. I mean, we're not even at training camp yet. We got a while to go. Things can change, and I wouldn't rule it out completely. And speaking of, I mentioned Quinyon Mitchell. He just got drafted by the Eagles. That's a good pick for them. So that's one cornerback off the board. Nunez says, still probably need to re-sign Pete, need tackle depth. I agree with you. I agree. It's kind of crazy that we reached this point where we went from we don't want Pete anywhere, and now it's like Saints got to re-sign Pete. It's a must. And I'm not blaming you guys, by the way, for thinking that. You guys are absolutely correct. So if you bring back Pete, you'd have him, as he mentions. You got Pete, Penning, McCoy, Ruiz, and Fuaga. And again, this is under the assumption that Ramczyk doesn't play another down for the Saints because he is slimming down. And I think if you're an offensive lineman and you're losing weight and you got knee issues, probably not playing again, which stinks because Ramczyk, when healthy, was an absolute dog. But such is life for New Orleans at the moment. Rachel says, I don't like Penning. I don't blame you one bit. I don't think anyone really likes Penning at the moment. Lack of production, lack of availability, whichever one you want to use as the reason, there's definitely a ton to put there and say why we're not fond of him at this time. Jason says Penning should be moved to guard. Yeah, look, I think that's going to be a popular thing for the Saints, but I don't anticipate them doing it. If I'm wrong, great, because I think it's worth a shot, but it doesn't seem like they want to do that. Brian says, I hope they keep Fuaga at right tackle. I agree with you. I think that Fuaga, you want to see him at offensive tackle. I just don't love the idea if you drafted him and all of a sudden play him at guard. Because that's kind of been one of my big complaints about the Saints. The Saints are notorious for drafting offensive linemen and switching their position. Pete was an offensive tackle at Stanford, then he plays guard for the Saints. Ruiz was a center at Michigan, then he plays guard for the Saints. Stop drafting guys who were not guards in college and switching them to guards in the pros. I don't love it. Again, we'll see. I like that flexibility about Fuaga, but I'd rather him play right tackle, like you said, Brian. So we'll see how that all goes out. Jason says, fail clowns. I mean, they're the team that had the biggest shock. I have not been that surprised by a pick in a while. Last 2 times I was this surprised by a pick was probably Daniel Jones to the Giants and then EJ Manuel to the Bills. That's a throwback. Anyone knows about EJ Manuel at Florida State? He was good at Florida State. I never expected him to be a first-round pick. But Penix going 8 to the Falcons, that surprised me, you know? And if anyone wondering why the hell do I keep pointing this way, I got my TV over there trying to keep the draft in the right-hand corner for me to see what's going on. Anyway, I'm going to keep it going. Z Nunez says, don't rule them out. Trading up for Thomas would not be off-brand. It would be intriguing. I think that's something that, LSU fans would love. He is someone the Saints have met with. I think the Saints have interest in him. And if you get him at 45, that'd be great. But teams that I would not rule out also showing interest in him would not rule out Jacksonville. They may need a receiver. I would not rule out Buffalo. I would not rule out the 49ers. And I would not rule out Carolina. Although I spoke to Xavier Legette earlier this week, South Carolina receiver. He's kind of like a fringe first, early second. When I talked to him, I asked him about the Panthers because he met with them multiple times. They're the hometown team. He told me that the Panthers will select him 33rd if he's there. So if someone doesn't take him, he falls to day 2, the Panthers will kick off the second round taking him. At least that's what Xavier Legette's been told he claims. Someone else could take him, though. He kind of has a San Francisco type of vibe to him. If they're moving on from Debo, that'd kind of be a good replacement. So we'll see. But as for the Saints, they go out there. They get Brian Thomas. I think that'd be a good move for them. And, BTJ right now is the type of guy that if you get him later on in the draft, value-wise, would be outstanding, and I think he's going to be a good player. I love the idea of taking LSU wide receivers. Like, the hit rate on them is like Kentucky guards for basketball. Like, there's one in a while, you get like a Harrison twin. Once in a while, you get a player that doesn't pan out, but most of the time, it's like SGA or Devin Booker, all these guys that end up hitting. So, we'll see. Jason K says, A.T. Perry's going to surprise people next year. I love our receiver core right now. I like him a lot. I think that he showed a lot of potential towards the end of the season, particularly in the red zone, big plays downfield. Derek Carr had trust in him, which is obviously a big thing there. But we have to see. We have to see if he can do it on a consistent basis. I'm not saying he can. I actually think he can. But we got to see how it all plays out. Because having a little late season run as opposed to, doing this for a full 17-game schedule is a little bit different, but I think the potential is there. And obviously we saw at Wake Forest how good he was. I mean, when the Saints got him later on in the draft, a lot of people were excited about that move and they thought it was a steal. Z Nunez says, D-line room is so crowded though, and I'm not sure you can draft someone better than what you have at this point in the draft. I mean, I don't want to say agree to disagree because we don't know, but I think who you're probably looking at if you're New Orleans, because it's not going to be a lucrative pick, but it is an interesting guy, is Devondre Sweat from Texas. He is I would say predominantly a run stuffer, but he's got off the field issues. Now, maybe you don't want to take an off the field issue guy, but I think he is the best run stuffing guy that you can get past day 1. And he might fall to day 3 because he just had another arrest recently. So it is a gamble, but I think that would be talent there. And I agree with you to some extent. I don't think the Saints are going to be able to get a guy that is an absolute game changer later on at this point for D-line. Then you get those game changers that are in this area. But, you get a good run stuffer. Just remember how good the Saints were at stopping the run with guys like Malcolm Brown. So I would love to see them do that, and we shall see. But it's definitely worth throwing out there. Jason says, love Carolina not having a first-round pick this year. Me too. It's kind of crazy. A lot of Saints fans complain about the situation they're in, and I'm not blaming them. But could you imagine being the Panthers? You are objectively the worst team in the league. Objectively. Your rookie quarterback doesn't look good. And oh, by the way, you don't have the first pick this year. Your first pick is 33. That's wild to me. Pick Joe Milton in the 5th. They have enough 5th-round picks that if they want to throw one at him, go ahead. I think Joe Milton's arm is freaking absurd. Like, this guy can throw the ball from New Orleans all the way to California. But I don't think he's going to pan out. But again, you have enough 5th-rounders. You want to throw one? Go ahead. Jason says, Pete's the Keith Kirkwood of the O-line. I kind of get what you're going at. Dalton says, good pick, but wanted Bowers. A lot of us did. I don't blame you for it. But I think Fuaga is a damn good pick. I really do. That said, the Saints might have been in the blender if Vegas didn't take Brock Bowers, because the Saints liked Brock Bowers. So what do they do? Would they have gone Fuaga still, or are they taking Brock Bowers? I think it's a very interesting proposition there. So, it is fascinating. Smooth Hoop says Fuaga and Coleman were my Saints predictions pre-draft. Yeah, actually, so I put out my pre-draft prediction earlier today. And if you go back, I predicted Fuaga first round, second round Keon Coleman as well. So hopefully you and me are on the same page, because I think if they go Fuaga and Coleman, I think that's a pretty good way to start off this draft. Leggett is my wide receiver 3. Would suck if the Panthers get him. Yeah, I mean, look, Panthers are going to get someone decent at 33, you'd imagine. Still like a late first technically, but we shall see. I mean, there's still a couple more picks left. Maybe he kind of gets, I guess as the kids say, sniped before the Panthers get to 33. And by the way, speaking of Brian Thomas Jr., sounds like he's going to the Jags at 23. Great pick. That was one of the teams I just mentioned that could be in the running for him. So that's good value for them. They need a receiver for sure. And Justin just bring it up. So Justin, thank you for keeping me updated. I actually do appreciate that, by the way. It's kind of like during the post-Saints game stuff, I might miss comments that are going on because I'm like locked in, but I appreciate you guys dropping that in. That's a really good landing spot for him. You know, they lost Calvin Ridley. Yeah, they added Gabe Davis, but Gabe Davis is not a game changer. He's a complimentary piece. Brian Thomas Jr. could eventually be a game changer for Jacksonville. So I like that move. Curious Need says, do the Saints hate their fans? They don't ever take a guy that fans get excited about. The last guy they took that the fans were excited about was Reggie Bush. I mean, I guess it's the way you see it. Me personally, I understand what you're saying because Trench's picks are not exciting. They're not exciting. D-line, O-line, not exciting. So I get that. But I was excited when they took Chris Olave 2 years back. So I wouldn't go as far as Reggie. I understand Reggie is that is the flashiest pick. That is the sexiest pick you can make. But Olave was exciting. I'd go back to 2014. I was excited when they took Brandon Cooks personally. So it's all subjective, but I definitely think that I understand your sentiment. But I think Fuaga is going to be a good pick. So we just got to bear with it. I will be back, guys, in just 30 seconds to go to best available and also get other comments you guys have. But I just want to get a quick word from one of our sponsors, Crystal. And in the meantime, if you haven't yet, smash that like button and subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube channel.
I need to clear something up about New Orleans. While our culinary scene might be on fire, our food has never been about heat. It's always been about flavor. And this is how New Orleans does flavor. Are we clear? Crystal. How New Orleans does flavor.
Once again, thank you to Crystal for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. Going to get into, I guess we'll call it premature best available because there's still a lot of picks left. We got Dallas at 24. So my math serves me correctly. We got about like 9 picks, including them. Let's talk about receivers that are available. I don't expect him to get drafted before the end of the first round. So I think Keon Coleman is the type of guy that you're going to look at. The dream scenario, which would never happen at 45. But Ladd McConkey, if he slips into day 2, I would love to see the Saints trade up and get him. I think he's going to be an absolute stud. Kid from Georgia. You got Xavier Worthy, the Texas kid. He is going to go before 45. I mean, that speed is just lightning quick. Someone's going to want him, but he's still on the board. A.D. Mitchell, I think he's a perfect fit for the Bills, but he's still available. So we'll keep it realistic. I think you're looking at Keon Coleman. I think he's an intriguing guy. I think you're also going to look at McMillan and Polk from Washington, both really nice receivers, good compliments to Odunze during last season. So they're possible. Ricky Pearsall from Florida is an interesting one. He's got a good frame at 6'1". He is a great athlete. Like, he is one of those guys that during the combine process jumped out to me. And if he's there at 45, I think he is worth a pick for the Saints. So I would look at him for sure. Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. He is not going to be a physical specimen like Keon Coleman. He's not going to be that 6'3" guy. But what he's going to be is that yards after the catch type player. And even though he's got that smaller build right at 5'11", there is like a Steve Smith element to him that I could just see him being a really good player for a really good time. And I think that is a guy that the Saints are probably going to have on their radar. And I don't know if he'll be available at 45. I think it's kind of 50-50, and I would probably lean towards he is. And if he is there, that is someone the Saints could take. And if the Saints take Malachi Corley at 45, you throw him in there with Olave, with A.T. Perry, with Rashid Shaheed. You got to find a way to protect Carr, but you're going to tell him the weapons are there. You got to make something happen. And that's definitely interesting. Obviously, it's not just about the position of wide receiver and getting a pass catcher. Like I said, Christian Haynes from UConn is definitely going to be on there. Maybe you go with Zach Sinter from Michigan, but I know there's going to be concerns, obviously, with the health there. If you look around, I think you could double dip at offensive tackle. I'm not saying the Saints should, But like I mentioned, Gaitan's still there. Rosengarten's an interesting one from Washington. If he's there at 45, which I don't anticipate him being there, he might be someone that the Saints can look at. Because before, when you go through your pre-draft evaluations and you get different opinions in the building, the Saints got an opinion from one of their former executives who had him ranked in the top 4 for offensive tackles. So if they value his opinion, maybe they want him, and that's how they'll double dip. But again, Rosengarten might go 31 to the Niners. That's a potential spot. But if he's there later into day 2 and he's at pick 45, Saints might decide to double down on offensive tackles. So again, wouldn't rule that out. Obviously, let's go to the defensive side of the football. I think that there's some interesting guys there. I mentioned Tavondre Sweat. He'll be high on the list. I don't know if the Saints are willing to gamble on him because of his history, but he's an interesting one there. Jonah Ellis from Utah. Do they want to go down the Ellis family roots? I mean, we saw them have success with Caden Ellis. Jonah Ellis has a ridiculous motor. Like, that's the first thing that will jump out to you watching his tape. It is relentless. Just like me, when I sit here talking and yapping and you're like, does this guy ever shut the fuck up? If you watch Jonah Ellis's tape, this dude's always moving. Always moving. It never stops. The motor is running 24/7 like 7-Eleven. So I think he's another intriguing prospect for them if they go that route. I mentioned it before, but again, cornerback is still loaded. Whether you want Cooper from Iowa, you want one of the Alabama cornerbacks, maybe you want Nate Wiggins from Clemson. There are guys out there that are going to be available. And then you can look at safety. A guy that I like is Cole Bishop from Utah. He's a little bit undersized. That might scare some people off, but he is another intriguing guy. So I think that the Saints are going to have a lot of options when it comes to 45. And a lot of that is because of the way the draft transpired early. I mean, you have 6 quarterbacks going the first 12. That's huge. I think we're going to have a receiver run coming up very shortly, right? We had Brian Thomas Jr. I would look at Buffalo to take a wide receiver. I would look at maybe the Niners to take a wide receiver, possibly the Chiefs, but it also could be just a guy that maybe, just maybe, they could go offensive tackle as well, but I would not surprise me if they go receiver. Obviously, Carolina at 33 seems like a receiver prime spot, so I think there's going to be a run there. But I think the Saints can still get talent because it is a deep position, so not worried about that. Offensive tackle is another one I'm going to look at, though. And I know I mentioned the ones before, but if there is a runner receiver and the Saints double dip, I know Saints fans are going to be livid. But if they find ways to get bookend tackles in this draft, it would remind me of what the Seahawks did 2 drafts ago when they went out and they got themselves their 2 offensive tackles. They ended up making the playoffs that year. And I'm not going to say it's just because they got their offensive tackles, but it did help. And obviously you saw Geno Smith's best year. So I would not outrule that. There are options for New Orleans. Without a doubt, they have a chance here to make some noise. And we'll see what happens for sure. I think it's going to be very interesting. So I'm going to get into more comments from you guys before we close this all out. I just want to remind you guys, even though the Saints are probably not going to pick again for the rest of this first round, they do have a pick 45 in day 2, which is relatively early. That won't be fun, and you could get a premier player. So we're going to have a video for that and also a show as well. So again, I advise you guys to hit the notification bell so you get alerted for that. So let me get into any comments that you guys have. And regarding best available, as soon as round 1 ends, I'll put a list on Twitter and Instagram. We'll have some stuff there for best available because, again, I think the Saints can get another really good player out there. Saint for Life says, Bauer's overrated, another overhyped tight end. That's more of O.J. Howard than Kelsey. I personally disagree, but I understand why people are scared about taking tight ends in the first round. Like, the hit rate is not ideal, and it is a luxury pick, in my opinion. That said, Brock Bowers is special. He is a special, special talent. I didn't think O.J. Howard was a special talent. I thought O.J. Howard was a solid player that balled out in the college football playoff. Brock Bowers, as a true freshman, was arguably Georgia's best offensive player. That spoke volumes to me. So I think he's going to be a great dude, but I'm cool with Fuaga, man. I'm excited about that pick. D-Park70 says, heard James Hurst say that Penning might benefit from a new O-line staff and zone blocking scheme. Your thoughts? I think he can. I think new coaching is paramount for the Saints. I think Doug Marrone's stay in the NFL has been worn out. I think you got to get fresh ideas in, which the Saints have done. And I think the one thing I could say about bringing in Kubiak, and I don't know if it's going to work, but if he's able to do similar to what Shanahan does in San Francisco, where the Niners on paper don't have a great O-line. Take out Trent Williams. You can't tell me that McKivitz is a great offensive lineman. You can't tell me that Spencer Burford's a great offensive lineman. You can't. Yes, Aaron Banks is good. Trent Williams is great. Outside of those two, there's not a whole lot going on. And their scheme and the way they're able to pull their guards, pull their tackles, and get people out in space and move people is ideal. And I think Trevor Penning, the one thing you won't take away from him, He can move people. He's a big freaking guy, dude. And I think he's absolutely going to be able to make some noise. So if you can do that, it's a good idea. And I'll say the Saints are speaking differently about Trevor Penning now than they did a couple months ago. A couple months ago, it was like, where's Waldo? They didn't want to talk about this guy. And you couldn't find him. No interviews, no nothing. Now they're saying we'll see and we know what he can be. Maybe he could be shit. I don't know. But they're talking about it different, and this seems like it'll be do or die. Because again, you're entering year 3 now. It's kind of step up or shut up time for Trevor Penning. So we'll see what happens. Jason says, who's the receiver in South Carolina that people have been talking about? What's his name? Xavier Legette. Big dude, contested catches. He kind of does all that. Smooth Hoop says, I think the Saints will get an outside wide receiver who can break tackles and make contested catches. All 3 of wide receivers are finesse guys. I agree with you 100%. And that's why I kind of like the idea of getting like a Keon Coleman. Obviously, they can go a different route, but Keon would be pretty interesting. I'm probably going to spend the rest of my night looking at wide receivers, and if they don't take one at 45, I'm going to feel like it's wasted time. But you know what? I waste times in other ways. So I'll probably do that. But I agree with you. They got to get a physical yards after the catch type of guy. Let's see. Forgot to get this one from Jason. Saying, wasn't surprised Sean Payton took Bo Nix with Denver's first pick. And that also said, so you took it the second time. Sean Payton took Bo Nix looking for the next Drew Brees. Yeah, I think that is the idea. A lot of people are going to dunk on this pick. And I could dunk on this pick right now. What I will say is it would not surprise me if Bo Nix to start his NFL career is better than most of these rookies simply off of repetition. I think snaps are very important and reps at college do translate. And when Brock Purdy started for the 49ers, everyone was kind of wondering how a 7th round pick looks so ready. And then you go back and you're like, oh, well, Brock Purdy started for 4 freaking years at Iowa State. He's got so many reps under his belt. And that was kind of the detriment of Trey Lance. He had no reps, coming out of college. I'm not saying Bo Nix is going to be great. And he sure as shit is not going to be the next Drew Brees because Drew Brees is one of one. But would not surprise me if Sean can get good football out of him, methodical football out of him, because he's got all these reps. He's a smart quarterback. Now, the upside is not like a Caleb. It is not like a Drake May. It is not like a Jaden Daniels. But again, I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised in the slightest. But anyway, guys, day 1 is almost in the books. It's in the books for the Saints unless they shock us. And if they do, I'll be back here. So we'll see. I don't know if I want that. I don't know if I don't. We'll see what happens. But day 1 is in the books for the Saints. They get Taliese Fuaga from Oregon State. He is going to be your right tackle most likely for next season. I love the pick. Most of you guys seem to like it as well. If you do, let us know in the comment section below. As always, guys, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Boo Crew Media's YouTube page because we are going to have much more content on the draft coming out. And oh, by the way, the Pelicans have a game 3 coming up very soon. That is very important. So it is a big time for New Orleans sports, and we'll see how it all transpires. But the Saints get their guy in Fuaga. I'm pumped about it, and we'll have more content coming up soon on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. Have a great night, everyone.